One subscribe from you could be the reason this channel survives. Please help us reach 1,000. It means more than words can say. Picture this. A homecoming ceremony. Hundreds of family members waiting. Soldiers marching in formation. Chests full of medals earned through pain most of us will never understand. And in the middle of that crowd, a woman leans across the aisle, laughs, and says 5 words loud enough for everyone to hear. A Purple Heart? Please. She paid for that ribbon. She was talking about her own sister, a United States Marine, standing just feet away in full dress uniform. What happened in the next 60 seconds would leave a sergeant in tears, bring an entire formation to its feet, and teach one bitter woman a lesson she would never forget. This is a true story about jealousy, family, and the moment silence became the loudest sound in the room. My name is Claire, and the Marine in this story is my daughter, Emily. But this isn't really about her medal. It's about her sister, Vanessa, and a jealousy that had been building for 15 years. Emily was the quiet one growing up. Vanessa was the one who wanted the spotlight, cheerleading, pageants, prom queen. She got used to being the center of attention. And when Emily joined the Marine Corps at 18, nobody in our family thought much of it. We assumed she'd do her 4 years and come home to something normal. She didn't.
She thrived.
She earned rank fast. She deployed twice. And she came back from her second deployment with something none of us expected, a Purple Heart, awarded for combat injuries sustained while pulling 2 wounded Marines to safety under fire. Vanessa, meanwhile, had spent those same years chasing a modeling career that never quite took off, followed by a marketing job she constantly complained about. She watched her quiet little sister become the family's pride, and something in her curdled. It wasn't hatred. Not at first. It was something smaller and uglier. Resentment that grows in silence, one comparison at a time, until it becomes something a person can't control anymore. The homecoming was held on a military base just outside the city. Rows of folding chairs. American flags snapping in the wind. Hundreds of proud families, many crying before the ceremony even started. Emily's unit marched in, and I felt my chest tighten with a pride I can't fully describe. She stood tall, uniform pressed, medals catching the afternoon light, including that Purple Heart, sitting just above her breast pocket. Vanessa sat beside me with her 2 friends, the same friends she'd been trying to impress her whole life. She was scrolling through her phone, barely watching, until the announcer began reading the citations for each medal recipient. When Emily's name was called, and the crowd applauded, Vanessa let out a small, sharp laugh. Just loud enough for the people around her to hear. I should have said something right then. I didn't. I told myself it was nothing. I was wrong. As the applause died down, Vanessa leaned across the aisle toward her friends. She wasn't whispering. She wanted to be heard. A Purple Heart? Please, she said, rolling her eyes. She paid for that ribbon. The words hung in the air like smoke. A few people nearby turned their heads, unsure if they'd heard correctly. Vanessa smirked, clearly proud of her joke, completely unaware, or maybe not caring, that a sergeant sitting 2 rows behind her had heard every word. For those unfamiliar with military culture, you need to understand something. A Purple Heart isn't handed out. It isn't bought. It isn't given for effort or attendance. It is awarded to service members who are wounded or who lose their lives in combat, defending others. Every person in that formation, every family member in those chairs, knew exactly what that medal meant, which is why what happened next hit like a shockwave. The sergeant who heard Vanessa's comment was a broad-shouldered man in his 40s, someone who had served alongside Emily during her second deployment. His name, we would later learn, was Staff Sergeant Daniels. He had been there. He had seen what Emily did to earn that medal. He stood up slowly, chair scraping against the pavement, and turned to face Vanessa directly. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. His voice carried across the rows with a quiet, controlled anger that silenced everyone nearby. "Ma'am," he said, "I was there. Your sister ran through gunfire to drag 2 of my Marines to cover. She took shrapnel doing it. She didn't buy that ribbon. She bled for it." Vanessa's smirk vanished. Her face went pale. But Sergeant Daniels wasn't finished. And neither, it turned out, was anyone else in that formation. What happened next is something none of us will ever forget. Another Marine, a young corporal sitting near the front, stood up. Then another. And another. Word had rippled through the ranks faster than anyone could have predicted. Not through shouting, but through nods, glances, and quiet nudges. Within seconds, the entire formation was on its feet. Dozens of Marines, still in uniform, standing in unified silence, eyes locked on Vanessa. They weren't yelling. They didn't need to. Their silence was heavier than any accusation could have been. It said everything. We know what she did. We know what it cost her. And we will not let her be mocked. Vanessa shrank in her seat, surrounded by hundreds of witnesses to her own humiliation. Her friends, the very people she'd wanted to impress, stared at the ground, unable to meet anyone's eyes. I remember gripping the arm of my chair, my heart pounding, torn between shame for my daughter's cruelty and overwhelming pride for the woman standing at the front of that formation, the daughter who had never asked for recognition, and now had an army standing up for her without her even saying a word. Then came the moment none of us expected. An older man, sitting a few rows ahead, stood up next. He was gray-haired, dressed simply, clearly not military himself. His voice shook as he turned to face the crowd. "My son was one of the men she saved," he said. "I wasn't going to speak today, but I can't sit here and let this go unanswered." He paused, wiping his eyes. "That young woman crawled through open fire to reach my boy. The medics told us if she'd been 30 seconds slower, he wouldn't have made it home. She brought him home alive. She brought all of them home alive." His voice cracked completely on the last sentence, and he had to stop speaking for a moment, overwhelmed. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was sacred. Vanessa sat frozen, tears now streaming down her face, not from sympathy, but from the crushing weight of public humiliation she had brought entirely upon herself. I want to be clear about something. This wasn't about revenge in the way people usually think of it. Nobody plotted against Vanessa. Nobody planned a punishment. What happened was simpler and, in some ways, more powerful. The truth simply stood up and spoke for itself. Vanessa had spent years quietly competing with a sister who never even realized they were in a competition. She built her cruelty on assumptions, jealousy, and a refusal to see her sister as anything more than someone stealing attention she felt entitled to. But in that moment, surrounded by soldiers and grieving families who knew the real story, her small joke collapsed under the weight of the truth. She wasn't just wrong. She was exposed, completely and publicly, for who she had chosen to become. Emily, for her part, hadn't said a single word this entire time. She stood at attention, facing forward, her expression unreadable. She hadn't asked for this defense. She hadn't wanted a scene. But the people around her refused to let cruelty go unanswered. The ceremony ended shortly after, but the atmosphere had changed completely. Families embraced their returning service members. Photos were taken, but an unmistakable distance had opened around Vanessa, one that no apology could immediately close. She approached Emily afterward, mascara streaked down her cheeks, and tried to speak. Emily simply looked at her and said, calmly, "You didn't have to believe in what I did, but you should have at least respected it." Then she walked away to greet her fellow Marines, leaving Vanessa standing alone in the parking lot, finally confronting the consequences of years of quiet resentment. I won't pretend the family healed instantly. These things don't work that way. But something shifted that day. Vanessa, for the first time in her adult life, was forced to see her sister not as a rival, but as someone who had risked everything for people she barely knew. In the weeks that followed, Vanessa reached out to Emily privately. She apologized, not with excuses, but with real accountability. She admitted she had spent years measuring her worth against her sister's, and that jealousy had twisted into something she barely recognized in herself. Emily, being who she was, forgave her. Not because Vanessa deserved instant forgiveness, but because that's the kind of person years of service and sacrifice had shaped her into. Their relationship today isn't perfect, but it's honest. And it started the moment truth refused to stay silent. Here's what this story really teaches us. Respect isn't something we get to decide someone else has earned based on our own insecurities. Sacrifice doesn't need our approval to be real. And sometimes the people around us, strangers even, will stand up for the truth when we're too blinded by jealousy to see it ourselves. If this story moved you, remember this. The medals people wear, the scars they carry, the battles they've fought, we rarely know the full weight of what someone has been through. Before we speak carelessly about someone else's sacrifice, we should ask ourselves if we could carry that same weight ourselves. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories of betrayal, justice, and redemption.